protocol. So Emilee, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Why don't you begin?
Let's see. Well, I'm from Michigan, living in Grand Rapids. I got married this past year. I graduated from a small art school in Grand Rapids in 2016. So that was during the election, and that was the Jordan Peterson podcast with Joe Rogan, the first one.
Okay. Well, congratulations on the marriage.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really great. So we got married this past year. I've worked at a bunch of different small farms right now. I'm working at a small farm that does flowers for like floral, like cut flowers, weddings. They host weddings, that kind of thing. So I work outside, and I'm doing snow plowing right now because, there's not much to do growing anything right now. So
yeah, I just talked to someone who flew into California yesterday, and he said winter just won't let go in Grand Rapids this year.
It's bad. Everyone's getting to the breaking point. Everyone's like, when is this going to end? Yeah, we've had enough of it, but it looks like it's supposed to be gone soon, but we'll see. This is Michigan, so
yeah,
never know the weather.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So so that's kind of the.
So you first heard about Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan?
I did. Yeah, I've been listening to Joe Rogan for a long time, since like the 300s, and off and on being interested in different guests, but right away, he clicked. Jordan Peterson clicked right away. And it was, I think I was already reading Jung a lot, so that had some to do with it, but obviously just interested in all the different aspects of what he's getting at. But his basis is so Jungian, it just clicked right away, and it was nice to have someone who's alive who's explaining these things, because you can read Jung, but to hear someone describe the different myths and talk about it was really cool. I hadn't heard any academics talking about Jungian things. It's always more of a new agey kind of topic, which is really weird when you actually read his collected work. Maybe it's not that weird, but he's in between.
No, you're exactly right. I remember when Jordan Peterson did an interview with Jonathan Haidt, and Jonathan Haidt exclaiming, "And you're a Jungian," as if covering, you're someone who works in the academy who takes Jung seriously, which seems to be a definite minority in the psychological field.
Yeah, which is odd to me, but I guess I haven't delved that far into psychology. So for me, I guess I'm really high in openness. So it all kind of clicked right away. He's talking about symbols and dreams and metaphors, and it just made sense right away. So when I started reading that, I dove in pretty hard, and I've been reading that ever since, just on repeat. Kind of like how you said you read C.S. Lewis over and over again. I'm just still processing these ideas, trying to get a better understanding of it.
Now, also from the email you sent me, you went into a bit of your past. I don't know if that's something you care to talk about or not, because it seems germane to the conversation.
It does. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, about how much personal information to give away. But let's see. I came from a more, I guess it's evangelical sort of fundamentalism. I wouldn't have ever called it that when I was growing up. We just said we were Christians, and I thought everyone who was a Christian thought that way. I didn't know otherwise. So we never attended church regularly.
Oh, really?
No, which is weird for most people. But my family was actually odd in that my dad was always saying, you don't have to go to church every Sunday to be a Christian. That's not what makes you a Christian. So I never had like the bad church experience that when I talk to a lot of people, they seem to have. So I read the Bible a lot when I was a kid, and I had this sort of framework that was really, I guess, materialistic in the end, but I didn't know it at the time, and it was really confusing. I was constantly trying to mesh science and the Bible together and try to figure out how that could work. Yeah. And then
but it's alone interesting that you grew up in a very fundamentalist upbringing that didn't involve much church.
That's weird. I know it's a weird thing. So I'm
sure it's not that weird.
That weird, but I talk to other people and we share experiences, I don't run into a lot of people who have the same upbringing, or especially not in church. I went to a couple summer camps and things like that, like Bible summer camp or whatever, but that was pretty much the extent. But we talked about it a fair bit, and I read the Bible a lot, and I had, my Jesus videos that I put in when I was little, and I was, reborn every weekend when I put my video in, and I'd say the whatever it is again, the declaration. But then, let's see, I went away to college, and my parents had just gotten divorced before that. So it was kind of this destabilizing time for me where I was just very confused about, like, what am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? What am I supposed to be looking for? Like, just kind of go along with what everyone else is doing. So I went away to college, and I picked up this book, The Evolution of God by Robert Wright. So I was just looking for something, and I was like, I need to know more things. Because I couldn't really function in that framework anymore, the sort of materialistic, literal reading of the Bible, but that was a huge point of tension. So I picked up this book, and I guess that was kind of the jumping off point, although I haven't reread it or anything since. But he starts off by talking about shamanism and like tribal gods, and then he gets more into moving from polytheism to monotheism, and then sort of the jump, like when Christianity started and what kind of influenced all of that. And he leaves it fairly open-ended, kind of saying, because he's not a Christian, it's a like secular book, and I'd say has a more biological, material approach to it, which I'd never really encountered, trying to mix the two things where it makes sense. And you're like, oh, well, so God has evolved throughout history, the idea of God and how we look at it. I'd never, heard anything like that before. So that blew me away and kind of opened up all these other ideas. So let's see, what did I get into after that? I went all over the place because I was just looking for what could fill in that gap, that void of like, what am I doing? What's going on in the world? And so I went through, I made like a list of the progression, but I was reading a lot about like early church history, and like the apocryphal texts and Gnosticism. And they were all, it's funny now because I hear you reference a lot of Christian writers and a lot of like apologetics and things like that. I never touched any of that except for C.S. Lewis, because I just wasn't in the church community. I wasn't around other people who were reading that. So it was more people looking in from the outside, which was interesting to me. I really liked that. So I spent most of my time reading. I have like the Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was reading through all that and just trying to figure it out, and went to like Eastern philosophy, trying to like maybe I could be a Buddhist. Maybe I listened to Alan Watts a lot. He was really great because he kind of mediated between Eastern and Western philosophy and kind of broke that down. That was interesting. And then I went more towards like mysticism and esotericism. And the sort of more like occult, but not really occult, but like the secret, the hidden sort of side of things. That was what interested me, because I started to realize it was more of an inward journey than like an outward literal understanding, I guess, is how I was like, okay, I'm gonna like take it internally instead of trying to put it outside, I guess. So I was just reading about any kind of different religion I could, or different philosophies, different ways of looking at things. And I was interested in psychedelics, interested in, like I said, like Gnosticism and things like that. So I felt like I wasn't a Christian anymore. I was like, well, I don't believe what I used to, so therefore I can't be a Christian because I'm not on the same team. It was like a team sport, it was like one side or the other. So I was really uncomfortable with that. And I wasn't comfortable with like having to answer these historical questions. So like, was Jesus a real person? Did he really, it's like, I don't know, but that's not really what was important, I guess, in the end.
It's interesting in your case that your teams are virtual, because your Christian team growing up, you weren't actually in a church that would be more like a real team with real living people. but they were kind of virtual teams.
Yeah.
And so then the next team you were on was also kind of virtual. These are pretty much going on in your head. So
that's trying to categorize myself,
yes.
I guess. And
identify as, yeah,
so that I could be like, okay, this is what I think, so therefore I can follow this path and move forward. So I was just drowning in my own life. I had no goals. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had like these vague feelings that it was kind of a bad time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, they were virtual teams for sure. I guess it was almost more like political. It was like conservative versus people who like science or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which was weird because we also tried to look at the Bible and see it through that scientific lens, finding giant bones in the desert from the time when there were giants, or I think it's in, what is it Elijah or Ezekiel, but the spinning wheels. And I remember talking to my dad about that, and we were like, it's a spaceship, God's an alien, just really seeing it through that lens. So but it didn't all mesh. It like couldn't make it just wasn't right, and I could tell, but I didn't really know why. So then I started, so I guess psychedelics comes into it at some point, I'm sure. So I tried acid several times, and I had just re-listened to the video that you talked about. Are these beings real? Should we be doing this? What are we really messing with? And there's so much interest now in like the therapy and the clinical aspects, which is really cool. But it is it's weird to talk about in that way because it's such a powerful experience subjectively. It's strange to kind of put it in that scientific lens. So I tried acid a couple times, and I had some really powerful, experiences like everyone does with it. It just kind of hit me, and it sort of burst through almost, I guess now I would say it burst through that materialistic wall a bit, because not a bit. It was transformative, I suppose, in just the way that I looked at things. And so Jonathan Pageon, I'm like, this guy knows what's going on. That's kind of the way that I'm formulating things now, but I'm still working it out because I've got leftover from how I grew up and how I understand things, and kind of taking that apart and where I'm at now, and just trying to get to the bottom of things. So the discussions about like God 1 and 2 have been really great. And then the flow states and the shaman stuff has been really interesting, because I feel like there's a lot there that we don't understand. Let's see. So the first, one trip I felt like, so when you talk about God number 1, we talk about God in the world, God in nature. I felt like I saw that. There's like, you're just blasted with so much information when you're in that state, and just patterns. Like I don't know if this is for everyone. I know people see different types of things, sort of, but maybe just the highness, high and openness aspect. I saw patterns like everywhere. I was watching Planet Earth and Life, if you've seen that show, and just that the patterns in nature were so clear to me. I'd never seen anything like it. I just sat staring at it, and it was like seeing the imprint of a divine imprint right into nature. And it doesn't look like matter makes things first. It's the pattern. Matter is mapped onto the pattern is what it looked like. This pattern was just everywhere. I mean, it was in everything, and I don't know how else to describe it besides that. So that was interesting, for sure. And then at another point, I sort of had this like the person that I would call myself, it was gone. There was no material world anymore, so I don't know exactly how to classify that. I don't know what to think about that. But I when I kind of came out of that, I remember I just cried, because I was like, everything is real. This is really happening. This is very real, and this is not just right here. I think it was like light, I guess, like white golden just somewhere else. I wasn't just in my body anymore. And it was like a feeling like I came home to a place that I had never been.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a very profound feeling. And that really solidified for me. I was like, okay, this path that I'm sort of like meandering down, I really need to take it seriously, because this is real stuff. This is really going on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think before it was sort of separated. You've got like kind of the mind body split, and I was in my mind a lot, but I wasn't really here living it out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what it really did for me. But at the same time, I guess it was it's a scary thing for people to just be experimenting with randomly all the time. So I don't know that I can just like recommend that for everyone. But it was definitely one of the most profound, probably the most profound thing that's ever happened to me at this point. So that kind of kicked me into gear.
And you also wrote that you had some bad experiences with it too.
Yes, I did. So
which is what's behind the statement that you just gave.
Right.
Not ready to recommend it to everyone.
Right. Yeah. And seeing other people doing it too, and hearing what other people have to say. So I had some bad experiences too. I tried to replicate the good experience that I had by doing it again. So I was just like chasing that thing.
Yeah.
And I had this feeling like I fell in a hole, like a black hole. It was so deep that I was never gonna be able to get out of it. And it was also very real. I mean, when you talk about like maybe hell or your own personal hell, it was very terrifying and beyond my control. Like I have it wasn't where like I could just sit there and be like, okay, just take a few deep breaths, it's fine. It was I was on a ride, it was I was not driving that boat. So that was something else. But
so what did the experiences do in terms of longer term change? You said that they kind of broke you out of a materialist frame.
I'm still trying to articulate that, I think,
okay.
But there's just experiencing it subjectively in that way as an experience of seeing, like for instance, seeing the pattern that I saw, particularly in water. I think it was that sort of Fibonacci sort of spiraling pattern thing. Rather than reading about it, I'd read about sacred geometry and the golden ratio and all that, but it didn't have an impact. It was just an idea. But kind of experiencing it, like I don't know, broke down this wall.
And we could add that you are an artist, and you did send me some images of some samples, and they're very beautiful. They're very patterned.
Yeah.
So they were very interesting.
I started drawing differently immediately afterward. Actually, that was one thing. So before I was doing things more in it was kind of the way I was taught, but more in a very realistic manner. So we're looking at photos and just kind of copying, and we're combining different photos and things.
Right.
Because I got my degree in illustration, so it's about you're just constructing a narrative, usually quickly for something, and after that, it became structural suddenly. Which is something that Jonathan Pageau talks about, and I was doing before I understood that was kind of what that meant. So the first thing I drew was this mountain with the sun kind of like bursting over it, maybe, and then there's water underneath and like a geometric structure. And I was kind of looking back. It just kind of like happened. I just drew it. But afterward, it's a structure of probably like the consciousness or the mind or just the reality in some way. So there's like heavens, there's chaos, there's material that's, I always do it geometrically, but it's just the particles, the singular pieces of matter that are heavy and dark red. And then there's the things up top, which are more ambiguous and unitive, I think, usually. So now when I draw things, it's usually structural. It's more symbolic, and I'm doing that on purpose now more. But when I first started drawing things after that, it was different, and it was just kind of that was probably the biggest thing that I noticed as far as long-term change besides just the things that I was interested in now, the way I was looking at interpreting things. Yeah. So that, so I
How
guess
many years ago was this that you?
I think it was 2015. So maybe four years ago, something.
So
I was like
a little
halfway
bit before Peterson and Rogan.
Yep. So I was, so I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of doing it. And I was like, this makes sense. This is the way I should do things. And then the drawings that I did after that were, I would say like psychological states or like mythical psychological states that included this structure, usually like a top and a bottom, like an above and a below. And like very symmetrical, which was not how I was drawing before. I just couldn't help it after that. Though I was like, this is what I need to get out. So it gave me a clearer direction with what I was trying to express that I didn't have before. Before I was just kind of grasping at little like feelings, not little feelings, but feelings. I just didn't know what I was grasping at. But then because I was able to look at things more internally instead of externally, I think too, that helped. So that changed the way I was creating things for sure. Yeah. So.
No, it's very interesting, and I mean your artwork is very beautiful. And if you have any of it online, and if we do share this, I mean, I'd certainly be happy to post a link so that people could find your art.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. I just have an Instagram right now, and I do have an online store. I just got prints available. I got a printer, and I can make prints now. So I'm trying to work my way up into actually sharing it
snow
with
plowing.
the world. Yeah, well, between snow plowing and greenhouse stuff, I'm trying to squeeze this in. So I'm working on Cain and Abel right now.
Okay.
Because I decided to go. I kind of wanted to follow Peterson's biblical series.
Yep.
And do not one for each, but for the major stories. So I'm working on Cain and Abel right now.
Okay. Wow. So then you found Peterson, and what kind of changes did Peterson bring in terms of your thought or your art or your life?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, so much, right? He just, I've been latched onto that ever since. I've been following all of that. He his worldview was really interesting, but his get your life together sort of mode was helpful for me because I was getting out of school. The election was going on. So, I mean, I don't know if it was like this. It was kind of a crazy time for kind of everyone, but I especially felt like this, I could like the external feeling for just making me, I felt like everybody was going a little crazy at that time, right before the election. I mean, just, and in art school too, art students are notoriously left just, and that's not that it was just at that particular time that was really hard, especially coming from a more conservative Christian family where I was like, I'm not talking about this with anyone. I'm just gonna keep my head down and get through this. So it was helpful to hear from Peterson where I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person who kind of thinks like this or values these things. That was helpful. And then just getting my life in order and trying to take more responsibility. Don't lie more than, what does he say? More than,
or at least don't tell the truth. I mean, don't tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
At least don't lie. Yeah. So just his rules were helpful, or his just get up and do it. Like, take responsibility for your life. Go get a job. Go be responsible. It was a good thing to hear because no one's really talking about that. Where you actually want to listen, which is an odd thing. Because you can hear different self-help people say this or that, but it doesn't have an effect, I don't think, most of the time, at least not like I've seen with Peterson, which has been just, apparently a lot of people are needing that. So it kicked me into gear a little bit as far as getting it together, especially getting out of school and not knowing what to do, because there's not a 9 to 5 for having a fine arts degree generally. So I was like, what am I gonna do? I was working at a perennial nursery, and just sweating in the sun and just dirty every day. And my family was like, what are you doing? Why like why don't you go try to work for Hallmark? And I was like, I can't do it. I just can't. I could never really see myself as like working for other people with the art. I just couldn't. So I was like, I'm going to go do manual labor because I felt like it was good for me.
I don't know if your art on Hallmark cards would help their sales, but exactly. I buy it. It's really cool.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
Hallmark?
Exactly. I was like, I don't think that's my thing. And, or why don't you do children's books? And I'm like, I don't really know what to say to kids. Like, that was not the thing I was trying to get across. So,
yeah. Well, and it's helpful. I mean, I know Grand Rapids because I lived in Grand Rapids a bunch of my life, and it's the center of my, the Christian Reformed Church because it's a major presence in Grand Rapids. So, but Grand Rapids has changed quite a bit in the last 10, 15, 20 years too.
That's what they say.
It's a much hipper town than it was back when I was going to school.
Yeah.
And certainly back when my parents were going to school. So, but at the same time, you can't help but if you're living in Grand Rapids, there's a fairly deep pool of rather kitschy, fundamentalist Christian culture.
Yeah, there really is. It's strong here. So so my family's from over here. So it's just in the culture.
Yep.
And it has changed. We've got our craft breweries and our little shops with funny names, but I think it's still the underlayer is that kind of Dutch conservative, industrious, which I don't mind. I like it here, but there's a weird thing that we've got going on now.
Yeah. So you got out of school and you didn't make $1 million by selling your art, and you're working in nurseries, getting your hands dirty, which I think is also a part of this because you're connecting to something when you're doing gardening, you're connecting to something deeply real. And increasingly, a lot of our population is working in jobs that are working off the cultural overlayer and don't really get their hands dirty. Right. So it's very interesting to me that you are working in nurseries and you are, even plowing snow. Your life is shaped by the rhythms of the earth rather than necessarily just the flows of culture.
Right. And that's the way that I like it. It's not everyone's cup of tea because I get to hear about that a lot. Like, why do you want to do that? My hands are always dirty. I'm always sunburned, or have a farmer's tan most of the time. Yeah. But that's it's just so much more rewarding than I couldn't imagine going to a store or an office every day. I couldn't do it. So, and I like to be busy, and I like to be tired at the end of the day too, and to be outside. So, I'm about tired of snow plowing though, to be honest.
Well, I've lived through many winters in Grand Rapids, and I very much know the feeling of when will it be over.
So we're just kind of hibernating.
Those quite a bit north of Grand Rapids won't have a lot of sympathy for your idea.
No, which is fine. It hasn't really been too bad. I'm just ready to get outside again. But the manual labor does leave me a lot of time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks. And so I get my fill of this content daily. Just, I've got these things bouncing around my head. So it's almost like I've been trying to articulate some of it in these past couple of weeks, just trying to like prepare maybe what I might want to talk about. But it's everywhere, all over the place. So.
I understand that. That's how I feel when I sit down to make a video. I want to talk about everything. Well, words don't work that way.
But you do usually have like 6 topics in your titles.
That's right. It's my ADHD is.
No, I know. I'm about the same. So I get it. But So let's see.
We've covered your life in about half our time. So, but yours. So what's on your list?
Well, I'm kind of interested to hear what you might have to say about Jung and maybe talking about some of those ideas, because he seems to come in and out of the conversation, but I'm not really hearing him being talked about that much in this little sphere of people who are discussing, or maybe I'm just not listening to the right people, but I know Rebel Wisdom has talked about a bit of, they're really into that, into like the shadow. It seems to be like essentially what they're interested in. They're not as interested in the other parts, I don't think.
Right.
Because maybe they're interested in get just also like self-help kind of, and not self-help, but working through your issues kind of thing. But they kind of leave out a lot of Jung, even though they do take the shadow idea comes up a lot. And then Peterson really hasn't even talked about Jung too much. I mean, he'll bring him in and out, but he's such a foundation for him. And but he's kind of slipping into the conversation. He's not really there yet.
I think Jung I think in a lot of ways, Jung and Peterson are very parallel in terms of a lot of things. But Jung, obviously, beginning of the, early mid 20th century, that's when he lived and had his impacts.
Yeah.
There's also very much there's very much an anti-Jung. There's very much an anti-Jung element out there. There's also very devoted Jungians that are out there. And I know a good number of them are frustrated with me, and some of them has just stopped listening to me. And and part of it is I'm a Calvinist, and you growing up in Grand Rapids know what Dutch Calvinists are.
Right.
My father's family immigrated to Western Michigan when they came at the end of the 19th century. So there's some pretty deep biases and concerns around Jung that usually gives me pause. At the same time, I've read some Jung in this journey. This journey has exploded my book list, and so and a lot of these guys, especially Jung is not easy to penetrate. No,
that's why I'm just reading him on loop. It's just every time I pick it up, it's something new.
So he's not easy to penetrate. I have a real appreciation for. So when I was looking in my video about Paul Maxwell made an association between Peterson and Bultmann in terms of Rudolf Bultmann, who was another mid-20th century, but he was a theologian, a German theologian. And so Bultmann and Jung are kind of in the same, or they're swimming in the same waters. Yeah. And I think Peterson is Jung and not Bultmann in terms of the assumptions behind mythology. I think Bultmann is really, Jung is really helpful in terms of demythologizing modernity. That's really where he's helpful, and the power that Peterson has to demythologize modernity is Jungian. But Jung gets so esoteric so quickly, yet so many of Jung's impulses, I can far better. When I first heard alchemy on the scene, I thought, what the heck?
Right.
But now I understand why alchemy.
Right.
And I have a better understanding why the Gnosticism. So I'm continuing to, boy, this is dangerous stuff for me as a CRC pastor, which you understand.
Yeah.
I have a greater appreciation for aspects of Jung's work, but some of my hesitance about Jung have also grown. They've kind of grown together as my resolution of him increases.
Okay, that's interesting.
So your point is, I think, exactly right, that Jung probably hasn't had as high a profile in the Peterson story as he deserves. But I think part of that is just simply how esoteric and odd Jung is. And
it's very odd.
And not, in some ways, trying to read Jung is trying to read people describing their psychedelic experiences.
It's yeah, he goes so deep so often, and it's I usually have to reread a page twice, and I underline everything and have to because otherwise I just can't tear it apart. I mean, some of it's some books are easier than others, but yeah, one book that I would say, the Red Book, the Reader's Edition, if you're gonna try to read Jung but you don't want to like go too far in, or you don't have a lot of time, is really interesting because it's a story and it's a dialogue, and it's so full of images. I mean, it's like a dream. And you can kind of get a lot of his concepts out of that without having to read a huge essay that he wrote that was meant for other psychiatrists or other, doctors. Because it's just the story, the narrative of it is makes it way more interesting. It's very dreamlike. So,
well, and that was some of part of what really struck me when I was reading it's not really an autobiography, it's sort of an autobiography of his. What really caught hold of me that I thought was deeply correct was his observation that the story outside and the story inside, that the boundary between those two stories is vital. And as a pastor, so early on when you're in seminary, let's say Calvin Seminary in Grand Rapids, Michigan, they very quickly warn you, you're not a psychologist, don't do psychology, do pastoral care. Well, what is pastoral care? And actually that's not an easy thing to articulate. And my best answer to that is what pastors do is help people with the story outside and the story inside. But with pastors, there are usually three stories. You've got the story of the Bible within the Christian tradition, and you've got the story outside the person, the story inside the person. And so what pastors are actually doing are working these three stories together. And Jung's observation about people, again, this is demythologizing the implicit mythology of materialism. And Jung goes even further, and that also really struck me from those books, where his interchanges with Freud, his deep frustration with Freud's materialism. Yeah. And this gets into what for Jung is often referred to, as you did before, as the occult. Now, right there, when you say that word, as you well know, you trigger Christians hard.
Right. And what did Freud call the black tide of occultism?
That's right.
Terrifying. It's not somewhere you want to go.
Right. But not, in my opinion, not without reason, because what Christians often develop over time, especially with enough experience as like you're a pastor, is that you have a deep respect for the realities of different words trigger different people in different ways. So I'm trying to work on that. You might call it the personified evil, the demonic. That's a hugely complex realm that Christianity in many ways simplified and packaged, and because that's very much built in. So I've been going through the Gospel of Mark in my sermons. The Gospel of Mark begins with one exorcism after another.
Right. Yeah.
And so figuring out how to negotiate those terms from a highly secular Western context is really challenging. It isn't challenging for Haitians. It isn't challenging for Africans or many, many other people in the world. But in our context, and so that's where it's difficult. And so in our context, Jung creates a doorway into that demythologizing secularism. So now when it comes to Peterson, I think part of the reason Peterson hasn't spoken enough about Jung or hasn't really forefronted him that much is because of where most of his conversations are lying. I mean, when he's talking to Sam Harris, get into Jung with Sam Harris.
Right. Yeah, that would probably go very well. Yeah, I guess I do forget that he's in that weird gray area where it's like most people don't want to it's just, when I think about his ideas, they're just so, there's so much going on, and I just feel like no one's talking about it. But I guess that I do forget about that part of it. He's got like he's kind of marked, he's tainted.
Well, and look at, I mean, again, read the passages in Jung's autobiography where this chapter on Freud was deeply fascinating.
Yeah.
Because Jung has this sense of, something's about to happen, and he has the courage to speak on it. Now, if you're hanging out with Pentecostal Christians, that's not unusual at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so my experience over the course of my life has been frozen, chosen Dutch Reformed, very unfrozen Pentecostals, Haitian Christians who are thrashing around in the waters of baptism. So I can talk materialist, I can talk Pentecost, I can talk all these different languages, but exactly figuring out how all these worlds meet. So that chapter with Jung and Freud, that's an important chapter. And Peterson is more Jung.
Yeah, he does seem, to me, he seems like a continuation of Jung's work almost, or what Jung was trying to get across almost. Peterson seems to be carrying the torch to me. I know there's a couple other people that are kind of his basis of, everything that he talks about, but somehow he seems to be picking up that torch from Jung. And I think because Jung did talk about the myth of Christianity and that we have to live in it, and it has to continue. It's not just dead where we are. It has to keep going. You have to keep going with it. What did he say? He said something about Christians are very concerned about preserving what they already have, with no thought of making it roomier or adding rooms. Yeah. Basically adding on to the myth or continuing to live it out.
It's really helpful to also understand Jung in his time. Yeah. Jung is basically a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, mm-hmm. a little bit later than Rudolf Steiner. Okay. If you begin to understand what's happening religiously in Europe at that time, there's a lot going on. And so on one hand, you have the height of Sam Harris's tribe was basically came just before World War I. Sam really hasn't gotten the memo yet, but that's really the height of Sam Harris's tribe was after World War I or right before World War I. You had, so a number of other people in this conversation are often, Owen Barfield, who was a very good friend of C.S. Lewis, who was a theosophist. And you'll find theosophy continued to be promoted in Waldorf schools. And so there's another element. And that is by no means disconnected from Jung, even though I don't hear theosophists and Jung talking a lot with each other. They're very much coming out of the same water.
Yeah. Yep. Trying to figure something out after it's just the materialistic approach seemed to break everyone down somehow, or there was a cognitive dissonance. There was something that had to be solved or figured out at that time.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a lot going on at that time.
Yeah. And so then when you say, let's say, compare Peterson and Jung, mm-hmm. Well, look, Peterson lives as a Puritan and talks like a Jungian.
Interesting. Lives as a Puritan.
How many wives has Jordan Peterson had?
Just the one, and they met very young. Yeah, he's a very traditional kind of guy.
That's right.
Which is interesting because he's also that high openness, and he says we've just had this. Yeah, he's.
Compare that to Jung's private life.
Right, where he was supposed to have had affairs all the time, I think, and it seems like it was with everyone that he worked with. Who he did like all these women he was working with, they were all mistresses. Is what I haven't looked into it too much because I don't want to ruin. I don't need to know, too much about it. But yeah, he had kind of a sketchy life, and he did a lot of things that weren't included in that autobiography. He was working for the American government, looking at Nazis, and I mean, he was up to all kinds of stuff. There's more of a straight and narrow path, I suppose.
Yeah, and so as Christian ministers know, because the church makes demands on its clergy's private lives, as the Roman Catholic Church is, continuing to try to work through. These aspects of life, if you take just someone's teaching, okay, well, that's a piece of them, but actually how they're living their life, the hypocrisy is involved. So Peterson is Peterson. He's just as Jung is. He was born to a certain family. He was raised in a certain time. He's the inputs of his time and his age have all been part of what goes not only into his personal life, but into his message. And so I think all of these kinds of things are fair game. Part of the big divide that's continuing to be worked through, and this is part of Jew versus the rest of the world, part of Abrahamic religions now versus the rest of the world, is the idea of whether or not the Christian God is at the top of a hierarchy or one among many, whether the Christian story is at the top of a hierarchy or one among many. And so those issues, and so in the mid-20th century, as Christendom really reached its height at towards the end of the modern period, many, such as the Theosophists and Jung and the spiritualists, were arguing that Christianity is one among many. You had the colonial presence in India, which again opened up the Eastern world. So I mean, there's whole lots of things going on.
Right.
So when you live in a place like Grand Rapids, where you've got a considerable number of people for whom the privilege of the Christian story over other spiritual stories is a very live thing, well, there's going to be some tensions.
Yeah, definitely.
And that built into your story too.
Definitely, yeah. And I was there was that time I was like exploring the other options for religious ways of doing things, but ultimately it was kind of that I realized that this is what my family was Christian. Everyone before them was Christian. I live in a Christian area. It's our whole culture is built around this thing. And then to kind of just toss it aside and say, well, I'm going to be a Buddhist now. Like, well, I still have all the same problems and all the same moral issues that are trying to be worked out, and the underlying structure. You can't just get rid of it. I mean, because it's part of the elephant, I guess.
That's right.
And you have to just deal with the elephant that you have instead of making up a new one, which is what a lot of people want to do. I had a professor in school that was teaching a Buddhism class, and he had dropped out of seminary. He had gone to some school here and then dropped out because he couldn't. It wasn't making sense to him anymore. He was a fundamentalist before that, and listening to him talk about Buddhism really made me realize, I'm like, oh, this isn't. He was translating all of his old Christian problems onto Buddhism and just kind of like venting that out, and it was just so obvious. I'm like, oh, you have the same problems. You're just transferring it to a more mystical new thing, and that kind of just like, well, no, I need to stick within the framework that is built into me already, and that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to me as a structure, as a philosophy. So that's why Christian over other things for me.
All right, and with Peterson, this has been a big piece of this too, because if you watch him, for example, with Rebel Wisdom, everyone keeps wondering, well, why, Jordan, do you keep talking Christianity? Why not more other things? And he does that a little bit, but at some point you do have to face the demands of hierarchy. That if you start lining, you say, so let's practice egalitarianism in our spiritual life, and we're going to say, well, all gods are the same. Well, at some point that works if you have a very low resolution view of them, but you start digging into them and you realize, oh, they're making different demands, they're making different claims. These differences actually have structure and they matter. And I mean, it's the constant dynamic between the horizontal, or I'm dyslexic, between the horizontal and the vertical, where, oh, they're all the same. Yeah, but this is different. So better, worse, and boom, pretty soon you got your hierarchy stacking up. So
yeah. And ultimately you have to pick a thing with which you will function and which has meaning, which I don't think is arbitrary. So you can't just make one up. I remember having a talk with someone where I was like, I don't know what to do. I've had all these experiences and now I don't know how to integrate it and process it. And they're like, well, why don't you just kind of make up a new thing that works for you? And I was like, that's exactly it. I can't just make one up. It has to be real. Which is kind of when I was tripping and I was like, this is real somehow. It really kicked in. I was like, no, this is not, it's not just, fun stories or, things like that. It's like, this is part of reality. This is built right into it. So,
and you have to, I mean, this is part of Peterson's point too. Living in this world demands you make decisions.
Right.
Those decisions, whether implicitly or explicitly, are all built on these kinds of commitments that you have. And not only commitments that you've made, but also commitments that have been made for you by previous generations. And it's built into the architecture. It's built into the layout of the city. It's built into the economy. It's even built into your genetics.
Yeah.
And so with all of that, you have to make decisions. It's amazing we can make any decisions at all. And probably the only way we make them is because we're mindless of them. But they're there.
They're there. Yeah. Yep. So, that you have to wade through the chaos and finally say, like, this is something solid. I was just listening to Jonathan Pedro on Rebel Wisdom, and they were having the same discussion where I think David was like, but why do we have to go back to Christianity? Like, he wants to, kind of invent like a new thing. And it's like, oh, but what about, that's your roots. That's where you come from. That's where not just you, but the whole culture. I mean, you read the classics, it's all influenced by the Bible. I mean, you just can't get away from it.
Nope. And Christianity, and so here's the revenge of the pagan. Christianity has its own roots. And to not fully understand those roots. And so, part of what has happened in the last 2 centuries is that archaeologists, biblical scholarship, discovery of ancient texts reveals the complex world out of which, the Bible arises. So, and Jordan Peterson goes into the complex biological roots, perhaps, or evolutionary roots of the Bible. So, and usually what happens is these things are trotted out and used for, it's a typical thing of historicism, trotted out and used for, weaponized for whatever battle we want to fight against whatever current enemy we have.
Yeah.
But those, the more you know about the past, the harder it is to make those, make those simplistic weapons. So we have just a couple of minutes. So I wish we had more time because this has been great.
It's been great talking to you. It went pretty quick, actually.
It went very quick.
Yeah.
So any last things you want to get in there? And what I'll do is I'll send this to you and you and your husband can review it and decide, do I want to share this or not? Because I understand the stakes involved in that. So,
anything that I can think of off the bat to throw in there that probably wouldn't go on for another 20 minutes or so. So, I guess maybe I'll send you a link to see like my artwork or something like that might be interesting for people who are interested in that sort of thing. Thanks for making the time for me. I was really excited to talk to you. It's weird that you're talking back. I listen to you almost every day, but to talk to you is pretty.
Well, people say, well, I wish you had 100,000 subscribers. I really wish I don't, because I can do this and this is delightful. So
this is an interesting thing you've got going on.
So I will say goodbye to you and I'll say hello to the next person.
Yep. All right. Sounds good.
Great. Nice to meet you.
That was nice to meet you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.